Joining us now is Congressman Anthony Brown, who represents Maryland's Prince George's County. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Capitol Review. So you've led Maryland as a former lieutenant governor. Right now in Congress, you now lead and represent one of Maryland's largest counties and one of the largest minority communities in the state. You're also a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Can you talk to us a little bit about why the voting rights legislation is important for you?
Look, voting rights legislation is important to me. It's important to my constituents, and it's important to people across this country. It is perhaps the most fundamental freedom and right that we have. Our democracy depends on everyone having access to the ballot, the ability to exercise their right to vote, to elect into office at the federal, state, and local level people who represent their values, their inspiration, their aspirations, their motivations, their frustrations. And of great concern today is what we see on Capitol Hill, which is the inability, because of the Republican obstructionism, to pass meaningful voting rights advancement bills. And what we see around the country are Republicans basically rolling back voting right protections, election law protections throughout this country. So we're about, and I'm certainly committed to expanding access to the ballot. And regrettably, we're now in a time in this country where the forces that seek to suppress and limit access to the ballot are gaining momentum. So we've got to pass voting rights advancement legislation on Capitol Hill, and we have to do it now.
So if the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Accountability Act passes, how would that directly impact residents in your district, in Prince George's County?
You know, the way that it would impact residents, constituents of the 4th Congressional District, I think it would inspire greater trust and participation in democracy. Right now, there's a level of indifference, if not distrust, by so many voters because what they see happening around this country. Now, in Maryland, we have strong election laws. We really do. We have on-demand vote by mail. We have extended early voting locations and hours and days. We don't have voter ID legislation if there are any concerns about whether the right person is or the eligible person is voting in the right precinct. They can vote by provisional ballot, and then we'll sort that out later. So the residents of the 4th Congressional District have benefited from the hard work that we have put into strong election laws and voting rights, voting protection laws in Maryland. But those rights and protections are not enjoyed by neighbors across the country, whether in Texas or North Carolina or in Georgia. So when we pass this Voting Rights Advancement Act, when we strengthen our election laws, perhaps the most important impact it will have in my district, beyond the rights and the protections, is a renewed hope in our democracy, and that it works, and that it expands access to the ballot to every eligible voter in America. And I think that's important.
And in a tweet that you recently sent out, you said Republicans around the country are doing everything they can to make it harder to vote. Now, did you or your constituents see that happening during the 2020 election in the 4th District or even in a nearby district?
You know, in many ways, I mean, the answer is yes. And why do I say that? Because the original Voting Rights Act that was passed in the 1960s included this pre-clearance provision where the Department of Justice had to review any changes in voting and election laws in those states and counties across the country that had a history of suppressing the vote. So we've always anticipated that there are movements afoot around the country to roll back access to the ballot. And that's why the original Voting Rights Act had that provision in there. It was supported by Republicans and Democrats. It was reauthorized by Democratic presidents into law and Republican presidents into law. So we were always vigilant and understood that this right to vote is precious. But what we didn't anticipate was the big lie. What we didn't anticipate would be a president, former President Trump, who would invest so much energy in fabricating falsehoods just to secure his place and hopefully for him a re-election.
And lawmakers like yourself, along with President Biden and former President Barack Obama, called on the Senate to end the filibuster and pass a voting rights legislation. Now, you had Democrats like Senator Joe Manchin saying that ending the filibuster won't make things any better. What's your response to that?
Well, Senator Manchin is just simply wrong on that issue, but I should add that it's not just Senator Manchin. There are at least 4 senators that have been, that have expressed concerns about rolling back the filibuster. The filibuster is an old, outdated, antiquated rule. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in law. It's a Senate rule. It's a rule that was used effectively in the 1950s and 60s to prevent the advancement of civil rights legislation and voting rights legislation. And it's the very rule that is being used today to block forward movement on voting rights and protections today. We need to narrow the filibuster. If we don't eliminate it, we should at least narrow it where if there is civil rights legislation, democracy protecting legislation, which we can define, then in those cases, the filibuster should not apply. There are state legislatures run by Republicans across this country today that are rolling back voting protections. They are eliminating those protections. They're making it more difficult to vote, and they don't have a filibuster. They're using simple majorities to deny access to the ballot. So we should not use some fabricated filibuster rule to prevent a simple majority to protect the right to vote. So I call on Senator Manchin, I call on all Democrats to join forces. Let's put the filibuster rule on the floor of the Senate, and let's narrow it if we don't eliminate it.
And a lot more to talk about with Congressman Brown. We'll go over how he's tackling the major surge of coronavirus cases in Maryland's 4th District. You're watching Capitol Review.